Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns.
Hello, this is Kim Howerton with episode number 138 of the Keto Life Support Podcast. I got very announcery voice there. Did you like that? Anyway, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about some ways that you think that you're doing a good thing, but you're actually derailing yourself. So, as I mentioned before, it's that weird time between Thanksgiving and Christmas where, I don't know which end is up, but I do know that I don't want to be wearing real pants. So there's been some extra YouTube watching going on, and I'm not sleeping super well, which means there's more hours in the day to watch some YouTube. Wow, I'm sounding like the picture of health these days, aren't I? But when I'm watching some of these YouTubes, I'm seeing a lot of people in the world trying to lose weight. There are a bunch of channels on YouTube of people that are trying to lose weight and have been doing this for years. I guess they're weight loss channels, but they're people who are very, very heavy. I don't know how I started watching one of them, but I did. And now it's I can't look away. It's sort of like during the time when the pandemic happened and I happened upon my 600-pound life or something. One of those, and I was like, oh my gosh. Now, I haven't had a lot of personal experience with people that are, say, over 400 pounds. I myself was approaching 300 pounds, but there's some difference there. But one thing I have noticed is the thought patterns are very similar. Even if you're very, very overweight versus mildly overweight versus, whatever, they're all a little arbitrary. A lot of the same thoughts go on in the brain. And so I call it research. You could call it, I don't know what you want to call it. Anyway, I'm sure there's some term that's not very flattering. But, when I'm watching some of these people who are just really struggling to figure out what they're doing wrong, I'm reminded of my experience in my past. I'm reminded of the time before I found keto, the time when my disordered eating was very out of control, the time when it felt impossible for me to not go through the drive-thru in the afternoon on the way home to get second lunch or early dinner, whichever you'd like to call it. And so I recognize these thoughts. I'm not trying to say these people are so different than me, but they are different than I feel now. And so it's been a really interesting reminder. When you're in the middle of a problem, it's so hard, I should say, to see the solutions. And then sometimes when you're on the other side, you're like, wow, it's very clear. It's sort of like watching a horror film, right? And you're yelling. You're like, don't go in that room. Don't go in the basement. Step away from the chainsaws. You're it's so clear what needs to happen. But when you're the one in the horror movie of your life, it's not. And so I have a lot of compassion for the situations these people are in that I've seen. But it's reminded me of some things that are really clear. And so I thought, we should be talking about these things that are maybe clear to me or to many of you, but maybe not clear to everybody. And some of them are kind of ways in which we shoot ourselves in the foot with the best of intentions. And the one I want to focus on today, because it's a really good one, is the restrict and binge cycle that happens when we think that to lose weight, we need to take really extreme efforts. Now, that might seem weird because cutting out all carbohydrates is pretty extreme for some people, in an opinion. But I more mean like extreme dieting, extreme caloric restriction, and eating too little. I was also thought about this because I was on Instagram. I know. I was on Instagram and I saw, what was it? Ketogenic.com, I think it was. Sometimes they'll put up somebody's like what I eat in a day. And they put up somebody's what I eat in a day. It didn't look that appealing to me, but different strokes for different folks. And it was certainly what she wanted to be eating that day. We all have our own opinion about food, right? And a lot of people in the comments were like, that's way too much food on keto. And while I thought, I don't like those foods that she was picking to eat, I certainly didn't think that it was way too much food. I was like, that wasn't all that much food. What are these people talking about? Because like the thoughts about like, wow, people overly restrict and then that causes them to binge. And then seeing, oh, you're eating too much on keto. And I was like, oh yeah, I really need to talk about this. So here's what happens to a lot of people. I see it happen over and over again. We grew up in a culture where we were taught often, a lot of us, not all of us, this was not your experience, then bless you, that's awesome. But a lot of us were taught to restrict food, especially those of us like myself who struggled with food from early on and struggled with weight and lived with parents who struggled with their weight. And so a lot of those traditions were passed down about dieting. So we don't know what a meal looks like. We don't know how to put them together. And we think if we're trying to lose weight, less food is always better. And so a lot of people will eat too small a meal, like their first meal will be too small, but they're like, took the edge off. And then maybe they have another meal or a cup of coffee, takes the edge off again. And then by like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they're just too ravenous, too hungry, too low on energy. They've trained their body to kind of ignore their hunger signals. So if you ask them, they might even not really even say they were hungry, but then they don't understand why they're driving through McDonald's yet again. Then the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. And so this is actually one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons I'm a huge advocate, and I've changed on this over the course of my coaching, of breakfast and a big breakfast. Now, I don't think that breakfast has to be at like 6 a.m. I'm not a early eater, but as soon as like I'm up and about and, doing my day, I don't mean the first thing I do when I wake up, but by the time I'm like getting into a functional adult mode, which might be around like 9 or 10 for me, I have breakfast. And I have it's not like an enormous breakfast, but I have a substantial breakfast because a couple of reasons. The first is actually that when they've looked at this, that people who have bigger breakfasts and then smaller as the meals as the day goes on versus the reverse lose more weight and have better health markers in several ways. Often see better blood pressure, better blood sugar control. And so I still eat dinner. Like it's not that I don't eat dinner, but I eat 3 meals a day now. Whereas early in my keto career, I ate 2, and I was much more restrictive during that time period. But I found so much benefit from eating breakfast. It's so much easier to control my food throughout the day. And I don't have the same desire to binge. It's just a very different world. And so I just thought I would bring this up, that if you're struggling with binging, even if you think, oh no, I eat enough during the day, the binging is something else. The first thing I would say is really maybe evaluate that and start your day with more food. Be less restrictive, even if you don't think you're being super restrictive. Start with bigger meals. If you're going to skip a meal or you're going to shortchange a meal in terms of food amount, shortchange dinner. Don't shortchange early in the day meals. Don't think 3 meals a day is failure. It's probably great for a lot of people. And it was actually an improvement in my weight loss success over 2 meals. Does that mean that 3 meals is always better than 2 meals? No. Some people do great on 2 meals. But I would say if you're struggling with overeating or binging or falling off the wagon, the thing that can probably help is eat more, eat sooner. That is my advice for today. So I hope you've enjoyed my ramble. Try to be entertaining and aware that I am addicted to popular culture. It's always been that way. I love popular culture. I hope this was helpful for you, and I'm just throwing out the tips. So take care, and I will talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.